Well, I was on the road again, and we went to a town that had a lot of old and antique buildings and structures, and it got me thinking, could we do what they did 150 years ago? Let's talk about that today. When we went to visit the old town, I decided to kind of take a walk and look at the sites, get some ideas about how people did things. I broke out the folding Eddie Bauer pack, and I'll review this separately, but it turned out to be a pretty handy little backpack that stows away in a pouch. It's gonna hold 30 liters, it has a padded back. It's not exactly a rucksack, but it did the job, and I was happy with it. Anyway, with the fold-up backpack in tow, I went about seeing the sights to get some ideas. Here's what I found out. I think a lot of us today take for granted the buildings we live in. The buildings built back then took a lot of manual labor, a lot of skill. They even had a couple of cabins from the 1800s that I got to look at. The construction was phenomenal. It was artistic. But to be honest, it probably took a lot of effort for these folks to make such a home. Back then they had the skills and the manual tools to do it. The question is, if there was something that happened today that affected our supply chain to that extent, would we be able to make a building like that? Would we be able to shelter ourselves from the elements? Look at this structure. It's wood, and in between the wood layers is actually a mud concrete. I've never seen this kind of structure before up close. It was really impressive, and to be honest, quite phenomenal. You notice it's old, but it's still standing. Even the way the town was laid out, the drainage, the culverts, buildings over the actual river. Really impressive. I wouldn't have thought of it. That brought me to another subject, cooking and heating. Look at how they cooked. Look at the way that stove is set up. I saw various examples of wood burning and cast iron and pot-bellied stoves all over that town. Makes you wonder, could we do it today? Can your current home accept such a modification? And if not, what would you do? Remember, these stoves not only heated food, but heated the home. Speaking of making things, we always take for granted that we have tools readily available. Back then, they had to make the tools with other tools. Things like blacksmithing, woodworking, making glass, these are all skills that, for the most part, have left modern society. Would you and your circle have the ability to modify and adapt to do these kind of things? Are you a welder? Do you think you could be a blacksmith? These kind of trades are ancient but essential, and we take them for granted, so guys, think about that as you prep. Speaking of building things, how would you get around? How would you go from A to B? Does our community still have the ability to make horse-drawn buggies, wagons, to convey the material? Hell, do folks still remember how to ride horses? How to ride carriages, how to direct the carriage? These old skill sets are essential in the world. To be honest, it's in a lot of places a lost art, not something we should take for granted. It would be a good idea to learn how to ride, even if it's just a basic ability. Another thing to think about, how to transport from city to city, because on horseback it's still a long ways. Would we see a return of the steam engine or the older diesel trains? The stuff that would be more resilient and more resistant to supply chain issues. It's a lot of questions to ask and think about. Back in the day, even the small steam and coal-driven vehicles were works of art. They were not easy to make, they were not easy to put together, They were not easy to find the material for. But they did the job, and they did it well. They made the country grow and the world grow. Could we go back to that? Of course, throughout history, people congregate. It's in our nature. So how would we handle that? Where would we congregate? Could we make the kind of buildings and organize our markets to deal with a future where we don't have the supply chain we have now? What if the grid went down? What if everything got hacked? There are a bunch of theoretical situations, but you have to ask yourself, could you find a trade that you could then sell to other folks in this kind of farmer's market? Finding places like this fascinates me, but it's also enlightening and eye-opening to see it. Speaking of trade, markets, and commerce, do you think our community could bring things like this old granary back to life? Would we be able to make the bulk goods, the bulk warehouses, the beef, all those things the old way so we can keep our communities thriving? This old building was built in 1908. This one was not far behind. Do you think we still have that in our communities? Do you think we could step up? It's something to think about. Even old roads like this cobblestone road are just fascinating. Look at the art, look at the beauty, and the resilience over the years. I thought this was a good picture to end this video with. I mean, think about it. It's the old and the new all mixed together. Do you think we could still do this? Might be something for all of us to think about, is learning some of these old world skill sets, whether it's homesteading or horseback riding. Maybe being a blacksmith. You never know when we may need it. Take care, guys.